All right, this time around we're going to be examining a casual conversation between Neil deGrasse Tyson and Richard Dawkins. Let's take a look.
Blind Watchmaker. Oh, that's my favorite book of yours, if I may.
Okay. Well, The Watchmaker comes from William Paley, the theologian, who said that there must be a God because if you find a watch, you pick up the watch. He was crossing a heath, he said. And you open it up. It was a great big pocket watch in those days.
Back when watches were watches.
Yes, right. And you see all the cogwheels and springs and things. It had to have a designer, of course it did. And so how much more would you say that of an eye or a knee joint or anything living? So that's the Paley watchmaker argument. Natural selection is the blind watchmaker. It produces results that are like watches. They're beautifully designed. Eyes are beautifully designed. Certain flaws, but they are beautifully designed. And they come about not through any design process, not through any deliberate design, but through the blind watchmaker, which is natural selection. So
that's hard for people to accept, especially if they're deeply religious.
Yes.
Because they already have an account.
Yes.
Now you're saying one of the acts of their God is some random force operating.
He didn't have to be there at all.
He didn't have to be there at all.
Yes.
And I think where people get confused, and even some of our people have made this mistake, Fred Hoyle, who was the architect of the steady state universe, who pejoratively invented the name Big Bang to describe the universe beginning in one point. He said that in a pejorative way. He wanted the universe to be a steady state. He did a calculation for how you would get an eye, a fully functioning eye, and how long that would take. And it was some impossibly, 10 to the some very high power number of years, given the rate at which you have defects in a genome. And correct me if I'm wrong, the rebuttal to that is natural selection is not completely random.
Well, no, that's right. It actually wasn't an eye. It was a hemoglobin molecule, but it's the same argument anyway. So what he overlooked was that it doesn't happen all in one go. He imagined all the bits coming together at random.
And that's one case that doesn't work, and it has another random thing that doesn't work.
Yes.
And you do that forever.
You do that forever. Of course, you're not. But what you need is let's use the eye, even though he didn't. You need a slightly less good eye, and then a slightly less good eye, and a slightly less good eye. And if you start with just a sheet of light-sensitive cells, which just detect whether it's light or dark, that's useful. It's not like
it's better than not having it.
It's better than not having it. You can tell when it's night or day. You can tell whether there's a predator flying overhead. And then if you have a slightly cup-shaped, if you bend that retina from a flat thing into a slight cup, then if it's coming from that direction, it hits that side of the. We are on video, aren't we? Yes. And so you get, it's not an image, but it gives a slight directionality. And then you close up and you start to get a pinhole camera. It's a very crude, it's out of focus, but it's sort of an image. And then you need a little bit of transparent gunk in there. It's not a proper lens, but it does something like a lens. And all these stages, one by one, they step by step, they incrementally improve.
And every improvement is the new starting place for the variations at that generation.
That's right, and then you get improvement.
Because every generation is not starting from zero.
That's right, yeah.
All right, let's take a look at what he just said. He was talking about the eye and giving a story about how the eye could change slowly over time. And I can imagine that, he can imagine that, but in reality, a mechanism for how that would actually occur is never presented. It is never shown how do you actually incrementally change something from no sight to the sight that we have. No explanation is ever provided. It's always just a story. It's always just a part of your imagination. You can imagine that could be, right? So let me show you some of the problems with slowly changing things. There's two problems. One, I can demonstrate with the hemoglobin that he brought up in that story. Hemoglobin, really quick structure. It's made out of 4 proteins, 2 alphas, 2 betas, and on each of the proteins is a heme molecule where the iron sits. And the part I want to get to is the four proteins, the instructions for building those, they come from DNA. So maybe you could change a letter of the DNA and slightly modify that protein, because their manufacturer instructions are on the DNA. However, that little heme is not. That little heme is not, its structure and what it looks like, how it's put together is not controlled by the DNA. And yet it's critical. That's what holds the iron. The hemoglobin, the globin doesn't hold it. It's the little heme that the globin doesn't hold. The heme is what holds it in place. There's four of them, so it can hold 4 irons. And how do you build that thing? It has to be built just right. You have to have these 4 nitrogens in the middle, like that, stick out and reach out and loosely grab that oxygen molecule and hang on to it. How do you incrementally build a molecule that is not controlled, its structure is not controlled by DNA? So that's my first point. The next one has to deal with the totality, all the things that have to go together to make something work. It's not as simple. You just can't say, in your mind you can say I can just slowly change things, but in reality what has to happen to do that? So for example, going back to the hemoglobin problem, it's not just as simple as, well, I just breathe in and I stick the oxygen to the hemoglobin and it gets transported to tissues. Not a big deal, not a problem. Along that whole entire pathway, we have a series of complicated things that all have to happen. When you breathe in the O2, it makes it to the into the lungs, the alveoli, and then it has to cross a little barrier to get into the bloodstream, and that barrier has to be a certain distance. Too thick, and it doesn't diffuse well. You don't incrementally go to that thickness. It has to be the right thickness right off the bat. So then it diffuses across, and then we got to transport it, or it flows through the bloodstream, and then that oxygen molecule diffuses into the red blood cell, and then attaches to the hemoglobin, and then heads off to the cardiovascular system. And the cardiovascular system has to be set up just right. You have to have it very thin where we're getting to the capillaries, and we have to have it thicker when we're next to the heart. If it's not thick enough, it's going to blow apart when we're putting pressure on it, on the blood, due to the heart pumping. If we're too thick at the capillary level, we're not going to get that diffusion. We're not going to get the oxygen. It's not going to want to leave. It's got a hard time passing and getting into the tissues. There's no incremental adjustments. It has to be the right way, right off the bat. So then we finally, let's say we get the oxygen into the cell, and now we're to the mitochondria, and we got the oxygen passing through those into the matrix or into the mitochondria. And now we're trying to generate some ATP, and we got some other interesting problems to deal with. We're trying to pump some electrons across that membrane using these 4 complexes, and those complexes are back to being made out of proteins, which you could argue, well, you can modify a letter, and maybe we can change the shape of that protein, but that protein, I don't know how you ratchet it up, because you have to have the little electrons going to hop from within that protein that's stretched across the membrane, so that it can pump electrons, ultimately pump protons from one side of the membrane to the other side of the membrane. So the protons will eventually make their way through the ATP synthase machine, which starts spinning like a little motor to make the ATP and so on. Those electrons, when they hop inside of that complex, they have to be a certain distance apart from each other, or they don't give out the right amount of energy that the system needs. You can't, too thick doesn't work, too thin it doesn't work. So you right out the bat, what I'm trying to explain is some of the properties of the system, and simply just getting oxygen into your body and to your mitochondria, a lot of those little steps, they have to be exactly the way they're supposed to be, or the thing does not work. There is no moving things up. If you make the arterial wall thinner, well, the artery blows apart and it's not going to work. If you make those gaps with electron jumps, well, they're not going to jump, and then the system's going to fail. If you don't make the gaps between the alveoli and where the blood flow occurs, you're not going to get the right amount of diffusion, and you're not going to be able to respirate. The continued process is not going to work. You're not getting enough enough oxygen into the bloodstream. Now, some of those parts are not even controlled. Their structure, with how they're built, some of them are controlled by DNA because they're the proteins, and a lot of the other structures are not built by DNA. So how do you ratchet those up? You got to all the little membranes I talked about. Their structure's not controlled by DNA. The heme I mentioned already, its structure's not controlled by the DNA. So you got the chemistry problem where the DNA does not control anything about how it's put together. You have the system-wide problem where you have lots of different parts that have to be working together seamlessly. And how are you going to ratchet all that up slowly? What does it even mean to ratchet a respiratory system up slowly? It can't even function if you lower it. If I thicken the wall, if I take any of these parts, if you go and study it yourself, if I take any angle or part of it, for example, I take the red blood cells that are being formed in the bone marrow, and they start to break, they age out. About 120 days they age out. I got to get those removed because the iron in them is toxic, and if that gets in the bloodstream, you die. So I have to have another system. I have to have white blood cells available in my spleen and in my liver to be able to take care of those dying red blood cells. And well, why do I need the red blood cells? Why is 70% of my cells red blood cells? Because all they're trying to do is transport that oxygen. And so, I mean, I don't want to keep going on about this, but you can't just say, well, I'll just slowly increment. In a more primitive form, I would just breathe a little bit of oxygen. And then later on, I just breathe a little more. And then we can all imagine that now that I'm this large structure, I just need to breathe a lot more. That's not how it works. That's the same kind of systems that I use are the same kind of systems that other organisms use. You can't slowly ratchet them up. So it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. Do you have hope for civilization as it's currently manifested in the world?
I think we have to have hope to live our lives at all. It doesn't mean that at an intellectual level I necessarily have but I live my life as though I have hope, yes.
I've become, cynical is not the right word. I've become a practical cynic. There are people who think this way or feel that way or behave this other way. And I've stopped trying to change them. What I try to do is offer a way of looking at the world that maybe they'll take, maybe they won't. Maybe as an educator, it's my job to make this as tasty as possible so that, hey, that's a good idea. I never thought about it that way. But otherwise, I just gave a presentation to a Christian school, K through 12. I talked about optics. And at the end, it was open Q&A, and they were 11th graders, and they started grilling me on science versus the Bible. And I said, I'm not here to stop you from being religious at all. Okay, we live in a country that protects your freedom to be religious, and you're in a private school. So the government is not going to come after you and say you have to get this out of the public coffers. I made that clear, but I didn't have the urge to try to convert them. And I get the sense that you've had this urge your entire life to convert people with no less zeal than a religious person, a religious evangelical religious person would have trying to convert people who are not that. Did I tell you? I didn't tell you this. We have a Big Bang Theater here.
Yes.
And back when we first opened here at the Hayden Planetarium, there's a separate theater space where we just talk about the Big Bang. Someone came out of the Big Bang, saw me and says, how come you didn't mention God in there? And then I realized, okay, what am I going to do? I say, how about this? Why don't you go to our Hall of Human Evolution and then come back here? And when I tell them to do that, they never come back because that's way more offensive to them, having monkeys and humans hold hands in the dioramas than anything we could ever say in the Big Bang here.
I thought they'd rather like the Big Bang. I mean, the Big Bang sounds pretty much like Genesis.
It's a creation event. Yeah.
Yes.
Maybe that's why they thought we should have mentioned God and didn't. But I don't even have the conversation. I just send them over to your part of the museum.
Yes. But I think you're being too pusillanimous. You shouldn't duck the question.
Well, I don't duck it so much as sometimes I don't have the energy.
Oh, that's different. I get that too.
You feel that?
I understand that. But in my field, that really is an absolute opposition. It's not something you
complete. Although the Catholic Church, they've met you in the middle.
Yeah, they have.
They said, we have this branch of primates, and then God breathed the soul into them, and they're humans, allowing evolution all up to that point.
Yeah.
That's you got to give them some. You got to
not a step.
But the world is not that binary. It's not that binary. I don't see it that way. There are religious people who are where Jesus is their savior, but they're perfectly fine with a 4.5 billion year old Earth.
Yes, they are.
Okay, they're not at the extreme.
They don't see the contradiction, but yes.
So maybe the plurality of the world is a feature rather than a bug of the programming of what it is to be human.
But the truth is so much more grand and so much more elegant and so much more poetic and so much more beautiful. Why drag Jesus in?
And I would still claim you could get more of that across if people didn't feel stupid talking to you.
Yeah.
So that was the final clip. There's only just two things I wanted to mention. I'm just always surprised at how often the people that I listen to in either conversations or debates, how often the supposed atheist will invoke non-secular notions. Like Richard at the beginning of the clip was talking about having to live his life with hope. Later, towards the end, he was talking about the beauty of science and how we don't need religion to, I guess, tell us about or highlight the beauty or something. And then he likes to bring up things that atheists, it's not part of their religion, I don't know how else to say it. Hope, beauty, these types of things, when you're an evolutionist, there's no purpose. You don't have any hope. There's no meaning for being here. Even while you're alive, there's no meaning. There's no hope. There's no beauty. It's all meaningless. It's all just chemistry in your head. So I always find it fascinating the number of supposed atheists who actually don't live out their religion, their belief system. They like to just kind of kill God, but then keep all the things about God and religion that they like and live and incorporate those into their life. The other little piece, they talk about the Catholic Church, their religious stance on evolution. And since this is a book of God's works from the LDS perspective, I thought I would mention the LDS perspective on evolution. And that is basically that there is no perspective. There is no doctrine saying how humans got here. There is a little bit of interesting history. I won't go into it much. I'll just briefly mention there are definitely some conservative voices, some liberal voices throughout history, but there is no official doctrine as to how we got here. We had Joseph Fielding Smith, who gave a speech, very conservative thoughts, and then you had, shortly thereafter, you had B.H. Roberts and you had Talmage, who said no, there was definitely death before Adam, and there seems to be really long, and there's a little bit of controversy between the B.H. Roberts and the Joseph Fielding Smith. It was, I won't go into the history much, just a little bit of, I wouldn't even say bickering, just both presenting counterpoints to where they had to be discussed in council. And then Talmage he's a geologist, he gave his speech in the tabernacle, talking about how it seems pretty obvious that things died before Adam. But the point I'm trying to make is that there is no position, but there's certainly lots of people who think both ways. I'm certainly in the category of it seems pretty obvious that things had been dying before Adam, and it seems like God is someone who is an engineer. Of course, I see him as the ultimate designer. He doesn't like to spin his fingers like Q and just make things happen instantaneously. He seems to like to use the mechanics of chemistry and physics to get things done, to build things, construct things. He likes to use the properties and the laws of or maybe he might be restricted and enforced through that. I don't know. But he seems to, when he does things, are sort of mechanistic in a way, and you see the high design as if some engineer, somebody spiritually built a cat and said, okay, we've spiritually built that. I don't even know sure what that means, and then now we're going to place it on the earth, and I don't know how that would occur. I'm mostly just interested in showing that with what we know now about the cell, about our bodies, it just seems to me overwhelming evidence pointing towards not random events, but the actual presence of a master engineer who has put everything together. So, all right, I'll end with that.
That's true.